How are we doing? How are we all doing? Thank you again to Lamar and the crew. We're now going to switch gears a little bit because one of the things we're hearing more and more is an increased alignment between fraud and payments. So for my next panel, I'm super excited to bring up two sides of the house, card issuer and also merchant, to talk about trends within the payment space. So I would love to welcome on stage, Jeff, do you want to come on out?
All right. Hi, everybody. Good to be back. I missed you. It's been a few hours. I have the lucky pleasure this time to be joined on stage by two amazing minds in the payments world. So if you wouldn't mind adding another round of applause for Patrick Kelly and Matteo Gamba from Wayfair and Mastercard. Cool. Thanks for joining us. Well, we're super excited to share with you today our session on payment optimization, payments as a revenue driver. But first, let's do some quick introductions. To my left here, we have Patrick Kelly. He is the Vice President of Product Management for the Authentication team at MasterCard. And on the far side, very far side, feels far away from me, Matteo Gamba, Head of Product, Fraud and Risk at Wayfair. A lot of Wayfair today on the couch. So thank you guys for both being here. We really appreciate it. Payments as a revenue driver. You know, payments is my favorite topic, along with these guys. I'll probably age myself a little bit when I say this, but when I started in payments, no one ever called payments a revenue driver. So I'm very excited that that's what's on the slide, not payments as a cost center. Because 10, 15 years ago, that's what it was. It was seen as an expense to the business. And if you're on a payments team or a finance team or a treasury team, your job was to make that number go down. And now we sit in a room of people who work in payments, who work in risk, who work in e-commerce, and we get to talk about top line growth and what can you control and what authorization rates can you drive and approval rates can you drive. And for me, that's really special. It shows how far this industry has come in the last several years, and a lot of it has to do with great people like this who are talking about multiple KPIs, who are growing their organizations, who are getting executive input and executive sponsorship across all of these merchants from a payments angle. You have payments teams now. Those didn't exist. So the goal of the session here is to bring experts on, and I'll do my best to get out of the way as I struggle to do, but what's happening? What's new? What's innovative? When we talk about revenue and driving growth for your business, what are leaders doing? One of the big goals of Impact, as I'm sure you've heard and learned today, is talking to each other, hearing something that sparks your interest or something to think about for your roadmap. So we've got amazing people on stage to help do that. So I will do my best here to hand off the clicker to Patrick for MasterCard, and he's going to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you to the Forder team for having MasterCard, myself, and my team here. Really look forward to this event. It's become like an annual thing for us, so thank you. So I think it was IHG that said it before, right? Digital is key, or one of your customers did. We couldn't agree more with that. It is key, and I can't wait to have one of those hotel experiences. But we're seeing the same thing in payments. We've been seeing it for a while now. It seems like a while ago we were, all wondering, what Apple's going to do with launching their new card and how they were going to work with the networks, not with the networks. And here we are a decade later, post Apple Pay. So digital is not new to payments, but I think we still have a lot of work to do. And I think the common thread we've been hearing in a lot of these talks is it's not, payments is taking on a whole new position within companies. It's a strategic pillar now, right? It's a revenue driver. It's not just a cost center. It's not just processing. It's not just back office, right? So we see a lot of opportunity to take the ecosystem on this journey, especially as we go more and more digital, and we're seeing all types of new payment flows be unlocked in the digital space, whether that's online, mobile, buy online, pick up in store, all that's becoming important. So there's a lot to think about there. I think some merchants have done an excellent job growing their business, almost leading at times how the ecosystem shapes itself. But we're seeing some merchants that struggle to keep up. They don't want to think about payments all the time. They want to think about their core business and how they're going to be good at that. So just last week, we were talking to a retailer that they had a very good approval rate. Fraud rate was not great, but they were telling us, hey, we look at who's logging in and when they hit buy, and that's about it, but nothing in between. So there's all sorts of flavors and maturity around like how well they know their customers, the data sets they're able to look at, how sophisticated they are. And we know this is a data game at the end of the day. So I would say, cardholders are expecting the best now. It's table stakes to have a flawless checkout and buying experience. Cardholders are using more cards in more places. They're sharing cards. They're getting confused with all these different transactions happening at all these different times. There's a lot of confusion in the space that we'll get into in a second. But I would say all these things are becoming increasingly important and thinking of payments as a strategic pillar. So with that, I always like to start with some stats. And some of these are like, I would say stats that we're kind of familiar with as a fraud and payments community, but they're coming back in a way that's a lot more sophisticated and harder to trace. So if I look all the way to the left, right, synthetic IDs, seems like a thing of the past. Like we all know synthetics, our data's out there, right? But what we haven't seen is how hard it is to detect now. We haven't seen real biometrics associated with synthetic IDs. We haven't seen them when they're nurtured for years at a time and now have a functioning credit score and pay their bills on time. And then all of a sudden there's a credit bust out, right? So it's becoming increasingly more sophisticated. These typical fraud trends like synthetics, account takeovers, bin attacks, those are all kind of we know what those are. It's kind of like check fraud coming back, right? Everyone keeps reading these check fraud headlines, but we're like, why is check fraud coming back? Fraudsters are looking for the loophole. And if there's a new and automated way or a lower barrier to entry than there was before, they're going to take advantage of those fraud vectors. Fraud as a service becoming increasingly popular. You no longer need a Tor browser to access the dark web and do nefarious things, right? You can just join a Telegram group or join the right Facebook group and get everything you need. So I'd say the lower barriers to entry are bringing back these traditional fraud types as well. So it's not a surprise that we're seeing some of these performance issues when it comes to payments. This is not a Mastercard statistic, the 87%. That's more of a market statistic, but it speaks to where a lot of merchants are today. We're not where we are with Europe, where they have those strong customer authentication requirements that really get them to that really nice 95% approval rate. Most of our merchants are still operating that mid to high 80s rate. So there's a lot of room there for Mastercard, Forder, and everyone in the room to collectively work together to increase the performance. Okay. So like I said before, with any fraud problem, optimization problem, typically it's a data problem, right? So we've been working a great deal with companies like Forder, many of you in the audience today, because you guys hold the key, the digital key, if you will, to a lot of that data that a lot of our banks really, really want to make better decisions on. We know Forder has some capabilities that have been going really well to help bridge the gap there. We're working with capabilities as well. And we see significant performance increases when we're collectively sharing data to solve problems. So typically at time of transaction, as an example, we'll see a 2 to 3% percentage point uplift in transaction performance when the right data is shared with the issuer to make a better decision. On the post-transaction side with chargebacks and dispute investigation, when a call center agent at a bank has the right data to have the right conversation with a cardholder, they can actually deflect about 40% of those disputes from ever being created. That's the type of engagements we're trying to unlock from the merchant to have with the bank and the cardholder. And then the same is true for first-party fraud. We are really excited about launching our new program later this month. We've been testing it with a bunch of different merchants and to show what the opportunity is. And it shows that, hey, if you guys can establish a transaction history with these cardholders, later on, that's showing up to be a 10, 15, 20% chargeback reduction. So all things that, are going to be further enabled with Forder and automated for you guys. But these are the exciting types of problems that we're solving with this increase in data sharing. Okay. All right. So some of these are new things we talked about. Some of these have been around for a while. I actually heard, and maybe it was you, Jeff, that brought up account updater before. And it's funny you mentioned that because that's like something that's been around for decades. Anyone in payments knows what account updater is, But it's still funny. There's a lot of room for merchants not using that today and using it more intelligently. So like I know a product you guys are working on. So happy to see you guys are unlocking that for more merchants and making sure they get more juice for the squeeze out of it. But I would say what's old is new in terms of fraud. The same is true for payment optimization. So account updater, table stakes, use it. Tokenization, another service being offered through Forder today. We see a significant uptick in performance on transactions when you're actively working with the issuer to provision that token and then later on do more secure transactions. So fun stat, about 1 in 3 transactions in the US today are tokenized, and that's on track to be about 80% globally by 2028. So we know that's the future. Some of the newer things in the last couple of years since the pandemic, I would say, pay attention to the reason codes, what the issuers are telling you. A couple of years ago, we would have been talking about, like the issuers never tell us about why they're declining things. We've come a long way since then. That's a small percentage now. So we've actually put programs in place so that that's actually the minority. And MasterCard actually puts on layers of intelligence on top of that to say, hey, you should try again in a few hours or try again tomorrow. You'll probably get a better chance of an approval. So these are things that are table stakes that are there today, but not everyone is using them. I think, let me go to the next one. Yes. I was closing. So let me close out really quick. I got a little tripped up on the slides here. But again, the common theme here, data sharing. Collectively, it's going to take a village, right, to solve some of these problems, whether it's first party, whether it's transaction performance, chargebacks, account opening fraud, synthetics, you name it. So I would say continue to work with Forder, continue to work with us. We're happy to unlock a lot of these new and exciting opportunities. And I'm excited to see where this journey takes us.
Patrick, I wonder if you would maybe dive into this concept of connected intelligence a little bit more. I know it's a MasterCard phrase that's been used for quite a few years, but I like the idea of, you mentioned issuers giving feedback back to merchants. That's a novel concept that it's not a one-way street anymore. Merchants providing data to issuers. Where are we on this journey of true connected intelligence with, the card network sitting in the middle, like you guys hopefully pulling and pushing data from both sides? Like, where are we in that?
Yeah, it's a good question because we need to put our money where our mouth is in terms of collaboration, right? It all sounds good, but has to really work on the back end. And I would say that's been phases, right? So a lot of it's been aspirational, but it's really starting to fall into place now. A couple of years back, we changed our chargeback process so that merchants always had a chance to determine what they wanted to do with that chargeback before we actually let it go through. That was a big change for our issuers, and many were not happy. But we knew it was the right thing to do, and we knew it made sense to connect that process outside of what it had been for decades and put more intelligence into it. We're doing the same with open banking. So we have an open banking capability now. We have a large identity network similar to Forder's, and we're making sure that every time a consumer links a bank account, we're actually looking at the identity of that bank account within MasterCard's ecosystem as well. So putting multiple capabilities in different parts of the value chain are proving to be very helpful in stopping nefarious activity, but also to steal from another presenter, unlocking those experiences, right? We're enabling experiences ultimately with these capabilities. And then the big one, right, is like we want to help you guys partner with our issuer base. We have a couple thousand issuers on our network. We can drive significant scale with you, with Forder, to reach those issuers. And we know how they tick. We know the kinds of signals and data they find really valuable. So a couple of years back, we put some rails in place for merchants to send data to them real time to influence the authorization, which is going well. But we need to kind of take the next step in that journey as well. So again, taking the data, putting it where it's really valuable, and then in an easy way for you guys or the banks to ingest it, to act on it, is a imperative for MasterCard.
Cool. Thank you. But Matteo, Patrick's already done the job of transitioning for you, which is great. Thank you for that. Yep. But let's turn it over to you. You've done, I would say, a tremendous amount of work at Wayfair over the past several years, building a payments organization and kind of putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is what matters, and this is why, we think we should be part of the strategic vision of the company. Spend a few minutes and talk to the audience about, from a merchant's perspective, why payments, why is it important, and what should we be thinking about?
Yeah. So I think at Wayfair, we've really transformed how people think about payments and fraud. As you were saying, like what was one being seen as a cost center is now seen more as an investment, something that actually drives value for the customers and ultimately growth for the business. I think the question is really about how do we define the concept of value within payments? Because it's something that doesn't have a one-size-fits-all definition. It can be different on multiple factors, like the size of your business, the verticals, the type of customers that you have, your tech stack, and even the investments that you might have done or not. And I think this is really key. I think anybody in the audience has the opportunity to define a unique payment strategy that can unlock value for your business specifically. I think what I want to do a little bit today is like try to give a little bit of a framework on how we've been thinking about that at Wayfair, and really starting from the foundations, like the stability and performance and security and compliance, because without those, the business can be on shaky ground. And the next layer is more thinking about the payment methods that customers really want. What are the ones that are really a must-have, the ones without you cannot do business almost. And once you have that type of setup, then you can start thinking about optimizing the funnel progression, optimizing the conversion rate and the authorization rates of the solutions that you have in place, potentially adding net new features. And at that point, then it can come the time to look at the cost and margin optimization, thinking about revenue collectability or renegotiating your contracts, and also thinking about fraud and risk management. So really making sure that you keep the money into your bank account. And ultimately, the last layer, really thinking about delighting customers, giving them something that they don't necessarily expect, such as financing solutions or a loyalty program or gift cards, like really giving them a reason to come back to your website. Really thinking about this as a coherent strategy. And once you have such a strategy, I think the question is really, how do you get to a point where you can actually execute towards it? Because how do you make it happen? And first of all, I think you will need to convince someone. That's always a challenge. It might be your team members, might be your manager, might be your stakeholders, the executives, or even a board of directors. Ultimately, you need to think how your strategy is aligned with their goals, with their objectives, and even personal preferences. And it really comes down to finding a way to secure that type of support, especially when it's about engineering resources and tech support. And when I ask a question, so raise your hand if you ever had some challenges getting your project or initiative prioritized in a roadmap. Okay, so probably the question is better framed if you never had that type of challenge, because that's one of the most common challenges that people face, and one of the main hurdles that we face on a day-to-day basis, especially if you don't have a dedicated team for payments and fraud. And it is tough to get that type of support, but it is possible to get there. And I think looking at Wayfair history, it might be interesting to see what we went through, because it's a good example of something that many other companies are going through and the steps that they might have to take. So when I joined 8 years ago, there was no payments team, nobody thinking about payments and fraud, just a bunch of different teams taking care of those tasks as part of their day-to-day jobs, more as a part-time work. And even when I joined, I almost had no clue. It's like, okay, you have to put together and roll out 2 new payment methods, SEPA direct debit in Germany and the financing solution in the UK. And we got it done. But there is a but, because if you go on our website, those solutions are not there today. And I think the question is really why? Is because at the time we didn't have a clear focus and strategy around it. It was some executives say, this is important, get it done. And instead we took that opportunity to look back and say, how do we build a strategy? How do we really think about hiring the right people for the team? How do we convince our executives? And ultimately, how do we listen to our customers to understand what is important for them? And little by little, we got where we are today. That is a strong team, a clear strategy, and good partners that we work with, and a set of solutions that deliver value for the customers and ultimately for the business. And yes, the investments at Wayfair have paid off, if you look back, because we were able to make our system more secure, compliant, performant. And as of today, we have uptime of 4 nines. We built our own orchestration layer. We have a multi-PSP setup. And also, thanks to our partners on the fraud side, we were able to bring auth rate performance to close to 98.5% on average for the whole 2024. So it's really been stable over time. And also, we've been able to reduce the total cost of fraud to the lowest levels in years, and reinvest in the money that we were losing and leaving on the table in solutions that help our customers. And I think really the point for everybody to think about is like we can rest on our laurels, and none of you should as well, because the payments and fraud landscape keeps changing. It's very dynamic, even if sometimes feels like things are not moving that quickly. There is a lot of innovation that is happening. And so how do you stay ahead of the game? Because that's really how you understand how these changes are impacting your customers and the business and ultimately your strategy. What I will say is, like, first of all, taking advantage of sessions like this. Impact, like, we have a lot of good content, so keep learning from that, talk with people in the industry, and just go out and keep learning. And while we cannot cover all of the different innovations that are happening in the payments world today, I think it's good to touch maybe on 3 topics that I see being really core for the future. And you already started briefly talking about it. As Patrick mentioned, like, tokenization is something that has been in the development for more than 10 years. And now it's going kind of mainstream with wallet providers and banks and card networks and PSPs all joining efforts and making card transactions more secure and performant. And then identity and authentication, because solving the identity puzzle is really crucial for improving payment performance and fraud and risk management. And with solutions like passkeys and FIDO credentials, and also the concept of a digital identity being pushed forward by many governments across the globe, you can see how payment credentials and tokens are getting tightly coupled with the concept of identity. And last but not least, also the rapid rise of these fast checkout solutions that are basically giving access to customer data in a very simple and streamlined way without that additional friction. Solutions like ShopPay, Fastlane, Pays, or Link, and basically moving away from the traditional guest checkout solutions that will be too clunky. And in closing, I think building this successful payment strategy goes beyond technical systems and payment methods. It's more understanding how they align with your unique business needs and your customer wishes. And we've seen at Wayfair how having a clear vision and strategy and execution can ultimately turn payments into this real value drive. So yeah, many challenges on the horizon, but we still have a few minutes to cover a few more of those.
I guess I would love for you to double click on a topic that when I was on the merchant side of the world, always found fascinating, which is this concept of build versus buy. We always have a laundry list of things we could do. Some merchants are big, some merchants are small, some are massive. It's always been an interesting dichotomy of some teams feel like they can build everything because it gives them control. Other teams outsource everything so they don't have to worry about it. You need partners to help teach you things and bring you to amazing conferences like this. Talk about the journey that you've been on, the 8-year journey you mentioned, and kind of building out this strategy. When you look at your roadmap, how do you decide if it's going to be passkeys, how much you're going to invest in build? If it's orchestration, are you going to build it? Are you going to buy it? I think it's a question that merchants run into every day when they think about planning, and I'd love your kind of a vision and approach to that.
Yeah. So I look at build versus buy as a spectrum. I don't think anybody will go, as of today, 2024, almost 2025, the route of building everything in-house. But also, like, you're not going to do buying every solution on the market. So it's you're going to settle in between. And that depends on the size of your business, your readiness, the size of your team as well, and your willingness to invest in an area instead of another. And also how much you and your team and your executives believe in payments and fraud being core capabilities for the team. Looking at solutions that are out there, for example, network tokens, that's something where you're seeing even card networks moving away from working directly with merchants and preferring having intermediation from third parties. So you need to find the right partners to work. And I think Forte is a good example. It's like you bring value to merchants. It's not just knowledge, it's also the network. And there is something that merchants will never be able to get, that is the certain scale and size and knowledge, because you're just focusing on something else.
Yeah, it's a great answer. Well, we got about 2 minutes left each. Big bets. You don't get to say connected intelligence. I stole your thunder on that. But Patrick, let's start with you. Big bets when it comes to the payment space that merchants in the room should be looking at. Where are they going to place their money?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I always say focus the money on the biggest problem, the biggest return, right? So I would say we're all trying to reduce chargebacks, so reduce fraud, right? But at the end of the day, we're trying to unlock a good customer experience to maximize conversion and revenue, right? So, I mean, that skews my answer kind of to the revenue side. Whereas if there has to be some sort of revenue element to what you're investing in. And I'm trying to also voice that in my organization to what we build and what we help merchants and Forter actually bring to market, because that's what you guys ultimately are held against to and what we care the most about. So I think big bets, it's got to be around sharing data in a safe and secure way, but unlocking these better experiences, right? Helping me understand what I bought, when I bought, what was in my check, what was my daughter doing on this website, what did she buy, right? Easy. It should be readily available and in my mobile banking app, as an example. In terms of we talked a little bit about payment optimization. We've had more data than we ever had before, but we're largely still where we have been in this market for some time. So I think we're at a bit of an inflection point where, okay, we know we have the data. We know what data is super insightful and helpful. And we know some data that's really not that insightful. So I think working with Forter, working with your service provider to figure out, okay, how do I want to get from point A to point B? How do I get there? What's the most data I can share? Because I know we all been a little gun shy about sharing data, but I would say we really need to go back to that and figure out what is the best way to do that. How do I optimize for it? Because that's going to have the biggest return. It's going to be sharing data and working across the aisle with the banks to optimize those decisions. It sounds like it's going really well with Wayfair and your auth rates. So we hope to all get there one day, but I would say double down on the data and how you can share it most efficiently.
Matteo.
I think connected to that, where I'm seeing, especially for enterprise merchants, unlocking the last 10-20% of the value is in having better conversations in terms of data with all the actors that are part of the payment processing chain, ultimately to reduce false positive declines and false negatives. So the more data you pass and you're able to provide context, the better the risk decisions will be made. And ultimately, the final decision makers are the Asian banks when talking about credit card processing. So how do you give them the same level of insights that Wayfair or Forter might have about the customer, about identity? And so really finding that technical solution that allows to productionize conversations that otherwise would take a lot of time and effort and personal relationships to get to a point where you can actually give more value to customers.
I love that. Gentlemen, pleasure learning from you as always. Thank you.
Thanks.